Welcome to Cratus in Conversation. Today we are joined by Tom Stannard, who is the Chief Executive of Salford City Council. He's got a very interesting background, and for anyone that comes on a Cratus conversation, you'll know that we are passionate about local government from both sides, both the political and from the officer level. So it's fantastic to be talking to Tom, who is just coming to the end of his first 100 days. Tom, thank you for joining us this afternoon from, I imagine Salford is a bit sunnier than your background shows at the moment. That's not live, so you haven't yet managed to get a new time zone for the city of Salford.
No, sadly not, and nor am I in the BBC studios at Media Keys, but I am actually live from the Civic Centre in Swinton, Colm. So it's great to be and talk to you this afternoon. Thanks.
Fantastic. So, Tom, you qualified as a chartered surveyor. How did you end up in local government?
Well, it was almost accidental, really, Colm. I did a degree in politics, and it was more politics that took me into working in the sector to begin with. I rang my local authority back in London back in the day after I finished at university and asked them if they had any entry-level stuff I could kind of learn the ropes on with, and that's really what took me into the sector. That was back in the day when there was a lot more employment around and it was a lot easier for graduates to get into the world of work, but I got an interest there and it kind of stuck with me. I've done a few other things outside the sector over the years, but working in and around politics rather than property and chartered surveying per se is really what got me into the sector in the first place. And it's been helping politicians to achieve what they want to achieve for local communities in a whole different range of settings across the country and in London and in the north of England over the years, and that's really what's motivated me. It's been quite a long time now, 25 odd years or so for me in and around the sector, but most of that time in and around local government, and most of it, like Salford, in big complicated urban areas of the country with challenge and opportunity in equal measure, really.
So did you ever want to be a politician?
The honest answer to that is no. The thoughts crossed my mind, but I've always been like many of us really, a keen observer of politics. I've always enjoyed watching, listening to politics, but it's never motivated me as a political career, really. I've got a lot of admiration for politicians of all parties, and I've worked in councils that have been solid Labour. I've worked in councils that have been solid Conservative, and everything in the middle, no overall control, hung, etc. And what I've always admired, particularly, and there is a different breed, I think, Colm, to politicians locally compared to politicians nationally. What I've always admired is the consistency, really, about community and place that local councillors bring. And there is that sense of the grind of casework and so on that sits behind that, as well as politicians at a local level wanting to achieve big national things for their areas, as we do here in Salford. But I think across parties you can see that real sense of people are in it for their communities, they're in it for their neighbourhoods, and working with them to help them to achieve those sorts of things has motivated me over the years much more than thinking I want to be in politics myself. I've never thought I wanted to be far away from politics, though, and I think if there's one thing you get from local government, it's certainly that.
So looking at politicians, you've got a great city mayor in Salford. You've got Paul Dennett. What's your relationship like?
Well, I would say so far so good. Honestly, Paul is he's very well known. He's high profile. He's an absolute workaholic, a bit like me. So I think we're kind of complementary in that respect. I've known Paul over the years in and around Greater Manchester before I came to work for the council here, and I've always had a lot of admiration for him. Not saying that as a political comment so much, but admiration for his style and brand of leadership in local government, which is very much, I think, taken that city mayoral model by the horns and really tried to achieve something quite ambitious with it for not just for the city centre in Salford, but for the whole of our area that we represent. So, I mean, those relationships are they can be challenging. They can be a bit like a hothouse at times at the top of organisations, but I think it's embedding well. You know, we've achieved some pretty good things over the first 100 days or so that I've been here, and there's a very, very big, very ambitious agenda on the back of the local elections we've just completed. And I think, you know, what Paul and I have said from the off is that we absolutely work with, you know, lots of partners in the city. We absolutely work with a whole range of different people, Coleman, and around the organisation. But our relationship is key to that, and the visibility of it is key to that. And we've been quite clear about that from the outset, that it's an important partnership at the top of the organisation in an important council in GM. And you know, we've made a virtue of that relationship, making it work and making that publicly important to what we want to achieve for the long run in the city.
Is there a challenge to working in a city that is within another urban area and has a mayor and has all of the other councils around it and indeed other cities right next to it?
Well, I think there's always a challenge in that respect. There are always, you know, relationships that have to form, evolve, and you know, develop over time. You always get elements in any local authority area. You know, we would be foolish to deny it of competition between areas. There's competition for resources. There's bits of competition for, you know, getting the edge on inward investment, all those sorts of things. Something, you know, as you can see from my background, Salford's been exceptionally successful on over the years. But I think within Greater Manchester and across the north of England, you know, Paul as city mayor, my own style is collaborative as much as it is competitive, and there are very long-standing, very collaborative relationships that I would say are becoming even more collaborative and mature over time in and around Greater Manchester. You know, I've worked in Greater Manchester on and off over a number of years now, and it hasn't always been like that, quite honestly. And I think the GM chief execs and the GM leaders are you know, getting into a much more mature collaborative position now for the long run. And I think that can only be for the good of the city region. And, you know, let's be clear, we're not politically all of one colour, and all of the chief execs and the management teams have all got very different personalities, very different people, very different styles. So this collaboration for the good of the region has to be the order of the day, really, Tom. But, you know, we do inevitably, as a region, I would say, want GM to still be well ahead of the pack nationally. And that means, you know, you can never, if you're trying to get things done pragmatically, you can never take competition out of the equation, I would say. But I think within the region, the collaboration is good and, you know, definitely maturing over time.
So friendly competition amongst the GM cohort. Some of them might be watching, so we'll take that smile interestingly. So there's a video on the council website fairly recently. You've launched something called the Salford Way, which is your mission statement to make Salford a better city, I guess. Am I misdescribing it, or?
No, that's absolutely right. Contrary to what some people have said to me, it's not the name of a new road. It is a road map, rather, you would say, for the future of Salford over the medium term. So yeah, very much a kind of vision of not just what we want to achieve, but how we want to achieve it. That's the essence of it.
So, does local government, in your opinion, get a fair funding settlement? Could it be improved? Well, it could be improved, but is it fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you're probably asking a rhetorical question of someone who's worked in and around the sector for some time on that, Colm. I would say no. You know, it's the funding system is widely known to be broken, really, in a number of ways, and I've been in various capacities in various regions of the country I've worked. I've been a pretty outspoken advocate of that for some time, whether that's in Sigoma, which is the Metropolitan Authority's interest group, or in London or in West Yorkshire even. And I think the challenge in all of that revolves around a couple of different things really. One is obviously social care and social care funding generally, which still remains unfixed and is still our biggest cost and demand pressure in local government. And people often forget, because it's a less visible part of our services than all of our environmental, regulatory, neighbourhood, potholes and highways services. But it's by far our biggest cost and biggest demand pressure. And the second issue is deprivation. And frankly, deprivation is very, very closely linked to how much money we can and are able to raise through council tax, through the banding of houses, through people's ability to pay in more rather than less impoverished parts of the country. And government has been, I think, advised depressingly frequently over the course of my career, which admittedly is not as long as some's, but over the last 20 years, many times, through the Dillnot Commission on Social Care, through all of the way back to numerous commissions on local government finance, as to what needs to be addressed and how that could be addressed. And I think fundamentally, over the course of the next Parliament, we have to get a better grip on both social care funding and on fair funding with fair deprivation weighting. And I don't make that point just as a Salford point, because I was making that point, frankly, Colm, 20 years ago in parts of inner London, widely regarded as being some of the most affluent in the country, that have got the very same deprivation challenges in some of their wards. And that's an issue for the sector at large that I think is still not fixed and certainly needs more attention now.
So Salford is working to become a Marmot city and particularly improve the health outcomes for your population. Has the devolution of public health to local authorities and the devolution of health and social care to the combined authority helped that, or does it mean that you've got more on public health and then there's another layer with the combined authority?
No, I think as things stand, it's unmistakably helped that, Colm, I would say. There is an issue about following the localization of public health funding settlements being reduced over the last number of years since that function was transferred across. But putting that aside for a second, I think that, and in the Greater Manchester context, combined with the health devolution arrangements, has actually been a spur to greater integration, stronger partnership working at a local level, and very importantly, and you can see this very much in the situation in Salford, much stronger financial integration and risk sharing between health bodies. And for us, that goes quite far beyond the confines, if you like, of public health alone. It's full integration of social care, of adults and children's commissioning and public health, with the acute sector in Salford Royal and in the Northern Carolines. And those have been, they've been really important achievements, and they've not just been bolting budgets together, quite honestly. They've been big, brave preventative interventions. They've led to reduced demand on the acute sector because of our ability to do that localized community commissioning much more intelligently in terms of prevention services. And I think my worry in all of that is the current round of NHS reforms, obviously coming in the middle of what we hope and trust is the tail end of the coronavirus situation, is potentially going to be another disruptive factor in the mix with that. And we've got to get that reform process right so that we don't sacrifice any of the legacy of that integration achievement. But I think local is absolutely the way to do that. The way you keep people out of hospital, the way you keep people independent in their homes and in their communities for longer, is by that very, very joined up, almost hyper local approach to partnership and commissioning. And that's been a big success for Manchester and a particular success in Salford over the years, I'd say.
So, looking at another area where the combined authority gets involved, and I'm not convinced it's entirely powers rather than desire, but homelessness. The GM Mayor Andy Burnham has been very involved in that, but that's normally a local authority function. Has he helped? Has it taken a burden off of you?
Well, being honest, I would say it hasn't taken the burden away, because there is still fundamentally across Greater Manchester, and including particularly in the very deprived areas, there is still a housing crisis that we have to solve, which is about a whole range of, supply interventions and, fair funding and, cost and so on to people in the midst of that housing crisis and affordability. But I would say, whilst you're absolutely right, Colm, in terms of where the powers and responsibilities lie. What's been helpful in Greater Manchester has been, the mayor has put that very much centre stage in his agenda. He's put it on the national agenda, and we've achieved, great things through getting more homeless people off the streets, through a bed every night, and those kinds of initiatives for GM. And I think what it shows in a quite intelligent way, which we've seen in other regions of the country as well, not just in GM, is that the directly elected mayors have soft power as well as hard power. They are able to raise issues up the regional and national agenda, and to do so very successfully by shining a spotlight on them, by corralling partnerships behind them, and also by helping to highlight, which is the point I started from really, the more fundamental issues about the nature of the housing crisis, of supply and affordability per se. And I think that's been a series of interventions really that's worked well. And despite the fact that, powers lie and accountability lie in different parts of the system for housing and homelessness, as we all know, I think GM really has led the way with the mayor of GM to, really shine a national spotlight on homelessness and get some real traction for solving that agenda for the city region.
So, can you build enough affordable homes in the city?
Well, I think the short answer to that is yes, we can, if we have the right level of determination about the policy, which unmistakably we have in Salford. I think there is an issue about us needing additional financial assistance to help to prompt that supply, because there is a cost to providing affordable housing and social housing, as we all know. But I think with those combined, we absolutely can. And Salford's been very successful on that. We have a very clear determination, Colm, as part of the Salford Way policy agenda that you spoke about earlier, that housing affordability, housing supply, and particularly the supply of social housing in the city through our Derive social housing house building vehicle is something that we're absolutely prioritising and pressing on with. I would be the first to say that we're always here to listen when government and Homes England and others want to help us with the financial intervention that bringing some of those products forward to market inevitably involves. But I think with the right level of political determination and a lot of work over the last 2 to 3 years here in Salford on all of the issues about establishing that council-owned housing company, we can really make some significant inroads, and we're doing that now. We've built houses, we've got a big pipeline of that to come, and we've got a very strong determination to address that. And that's not just about obviously housing in and around the city centre, it's about that reaching all parts of the city, because it's all parts of the city that the housing and housing affordability crisis touches really. Homelessness, I would say, is, it is a part of the problem. It's a big part of the problem in some parts of the whole city region, but fundamentally the issue is about affordability and housing supply and housing quality, obviously, in neighbourhoods. That is expensive work, but with the right kind of determination and the right kind of products on offer, we can, really make some significant interventions on that, which is what, clearly Paul Dennett and I are very determined to do across Salford.
How can the private sector help your housing targets?
Well, private housing supply is always part and parcel of that solution, and we all believe in a mixed tenure offer. We all believe in, and we do work very successfully, as you've seen from just take the areas you can see behind me, really, at the Keys with private housing developers and others as part and parcel of that. And the housing crisis will never be solved by local authorities alone, but local authorities have got that fundamentally important convening responsibility across private, social, and affordable housing, across for sale product and rented product, in really bringing those partnerships together successfully. And in exactly the same way, but in a very different context, when I was working in West Yorkshire, I think the local authorities that get this right have very strong partnerships with both private housing providers and with registered providers, registered social landlords. And we've got that here in Salford to work with. And let's not forget, Colm, as well, it's not just the private sector that builds houses, nor is it just local authorities like us who are taking very proactive steps in our housing development companies, but it's registered social landlords, registered providers as well. They're big builders, big contributors to this. And I think it's about working intelligently across that whole partnership, really, to solve the housing supply crisis over the long run. What's key for us in Salford, though, is making sure that we make very deliberate interventions in that market so that we don't just get a skewed private for sale product or an unaffordable PRS product flooding the market. And that, I think, is a very deliberate, you might say, more interventionist response to the particular dynamics of the housing crisis in our part of Manchester. But we're very serious about that, as I've said, and very serious about working with all partners to help us to tackle that.
So, talking about partnership working, you've worked with a lot of elected members down the years. What's the secret to a good relationship between officers and members?
I couldn't quite get out my my black box of tricks and secrets to answer that with one answer, Colm. But I think the key to it is it's relationships, it's relationship building, and it's remembering above all that I think what local elected members value is, as well as competent officers who know what they're doing, professional skill, and so on. What they value more than anything is officers who recognise who they are as local elected politicians. And the important things in that are, first and foremost, they are local community representatives, ward councillors. And I can't think, in all honesty, out of all of the senior politicians that I've met and worked with over the years, and that I've served under over the years in London, in Greater Manchester, in West Yorkshire, in Lancashire and beyond, I can't think of one that didn't think of him or herself as a ward councillor first and foremost, a cabinet member second, and a leader third, and always in that order. So I think it's about developing those relationships. It's about recognising that fundamentally, casework, community activism, and delivering to the people fundamentally who elected you is at the heart of that relationship, and helping really to see that politicians, like senior officers, are not robots. They're humans. They have their own concerns, cares, worries. They've got personal lives as well. And I think people who succeed in these roles are people who pay attention to the human dynamic, and to that very hyper-local ward level dynamic, because fundamentally that's what I would say, as I said at the start, Colm, it's what brings us all into this business in the first place, is to help to deliver those agendas for local residents.
So you worked on the West Yorkshire devolution deal. Yep. Did you get enough powers? Did you want more?
I think we got more or less everything we were after in that deal at the time, which was an extension to the growth deal, and it was particularly planning, housing, regeneration, transport, and infrastructure powers, and quite a significant quantum of funding overall, 3.5 billion plus of funding that came through that deal. We didn't seek the same level of health and social care devolution for a whole host of reasons. The circumstances, the partnerships in a very different position in West Yorkshire. So we weren't, in a sense, we weren't looking for those areas of the devolution deal. And I think quite possibly for West Yorkshire, those will come, you know, in future waves of that devolution arrangement over coming years. But I think in terms of what we were looking for and the latitude for what's now the West Yorkshire Combined Authority under Tracy Brabin following the elections last week, you know, there is a big, ambitious agenda there with pretty significant weight behind it. West Yorkshire is going to be embarking on a very similar common spatial planning process to Greater Manchester. There's a pretty significant housing deal. There is particularly good investment coming behind transport infrastructure, not just road building, and West Yorkshire is known for its logistics strength and so on, but also the expansion of rail, the Leeds, Bradford, Manchester connections, and potentially for tram and Metrolink extensions across the region as well. So, you know, I think given where we were and what we were aiming for, it was a very good deal. We were very positive about it, and you know, I would say, Colm, with no regrets whatsoever, we were lucky. We put our shoulders to the wheel and we got that signed, you know, almost literally a couple of weeks before the first lockdown in spring of last year. And I think the political leaderships in all of the West Yorkshire authorities were very, very determined to get that over the line. You know, with a good year that transpired ahead of the delayed mayoral elections, and I think the region for all of the cities there is in a really strong position for that. And I wish them, you know, as I said when I left Wakefield, I wish them nothing more than, you know, great success with that in future years.
Is there anything in the Manchester Devo deal that, if you'd have been involved in it, you might have asked for?
Well, I think I mean the big one, as I've mentioned, is health and social care, and that brings you know, brings a massive additional level of complexity, of risk and responsibility. But you know, equally, it can you know, fundamentally reshape those local commissioning relationships. I think you know, Manchester has been more ambitious and clearly more successful over a longer period of time, particularly with housing funding and a range of other things that have come through our successive devolution deals. So I think we may have gone further with that, but we've got to remember, Colm, as with any of these Devo arrangements, that, you know, context is key. Locality, history, the longevity of those partnership arrangements is key. And when we go back over the years in the Manchester context to everything that went before the devolution deals that we've now got, to AGMA and all of its predecessors, there is a much longer, more patient history to the collaboration between the 10 and Greater Manchester that has led us to that position. And I don't think anybody in any of the other regions of the country was, you know, kind of pretending that they would necessarily be able to kind of emulate that overnight. But, you know, I do think there is, you know, there is great work that's gone on in GM over the years. There is a lot that other regions can learn from it, and there are some areas of that quite unashamedly we took into the mix in our design and negotiation process in West Yorkshire that paid quite a dividend in the scope of the deal we ended up getting.
Let's go on to your first 100 days. That was the headline, and I guess we've explored plenty from that. So the boastful moment. What's been your greatest achievement? What are you really pleased that you've managed to do as you come to the end of your 100 days?
Well, Colm, probably the biggest achievement, I think, in a fairly prosaic way, has been actually getting to know people and the city and its communities against the odds during lockdown. Lots of people said to me, you know, you wouldn't really want to be starting a new job in the middle of a lockdown, let alone a CEO job in a high-profile council with, you know, quite a complex community. but I've managed to do that not just through the wonders of virtual working, but through getting out and about all over the city, really. Meeting communities, meeting ward councillors, seeing people, on their patch and in their patch. And I think that's been a difficult learning curve, although I know parts of Salford very well from over the years of being in Manchester before. I think that connection with communities is as important for the CEO and the senior team as it is for the elected members of the council. There's other big achievements that I think we can speak about later that have happened over the last 100 days or so. But for me, knowing and understanding the community and working with all parts of the city and trying to do everything I can, notwithstanding all the restrictions we've come to know and love, to be as visible and high profile as I can be, as an ambassador for the whole of Salford, not just the quays and everything you can see behind me, but for everywhere from Eccles to Walkden to Little Holton to Earlham and beyond. And I think that connection with the real city and people's lived experience in it, has to be important to how we steer, supervise and understand the work of local government in the long run. And it's been important to me everywhere I've worked over the years, to be honest, Colm, but particularly in this role. And I think it's been difficult against the odds because of lockdown, put it that way. But I've found every creative way I can to do that, whether it's on Zoom or on my bike or running everywhere or whatever it might be in between.
How have you tackled that with the team at City Hall? Like you, I started a new job during lockdown and found it really, really difficult to build those bonds with the team and your wider colleagues. How have you managed to keep City Hall happy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there is no substitute for in-person socializing, quite honestly, in the world of work and in the workplace. And it's been very, very challenging to get that and to develop that. I mean, what we've done is lots of different, my internal comms team here have been absolutely amazing, really, in working out lots of different ways to just maximize the reach and extension of that engagement across the workforce for me. And with my senior team, what I've tried to be careful to do is, as well as running the day job and processing the business and all of the decisions we have to make as a local authority, is to find time to have conversations without agendas as part and parcel of that, and to spend as much personal time as I can talking to and engaging with people. And that's I think that has paid a dividend. And rather curiously, Colm, as well, the process we've just been through for the local elections and the mayoral elections in Manchester has also, I think, for lots of us been quite a useful, believe it or not, team building exercise. I mean, they're hugely complicated projects, but actually, out of all of the wreckage of COVID over the last 12 months, they've been one of the few opportunities we've had to bring quite large numbers of people from the organisation, socially distanced and COVID secure and all the rest of it, but to bring us back together for the first time. And, I'd met every city councillor many times over ahead of that process through, Zoom calls and Teams and all the rest of it, but actually very, very few of them in person. And I think, doing that actually face to face, albeit mask to mask, during the election process has been, it really adds a different kind of depth to that, that relationship. And I think that's been positive. So we've got to try and, albeit we're still in a process of working through what's left of the restrictions, I think, we forget the sort of social psychology of work at our peril, really. We've seen mental health impacts and a whole host of other things from the consequences of lockdown, and we've got to work through that progressively over time. But I think you have to have a social side to your relationships at work, or you just don't get things done, really. So I do make a virtue of prioritizing that.
Do you think City Hall will work differently in the future? Do you think there's anything from the pandemic that will change the way you work?
Yeah, no, I do, and I think we will look to draw a quite careful balance, as many, not just local authorities, but many big organisations with the same kind of head count of staff that we've got in the thousands will do really. We will preserve some benefits of remote working for people. We'll preserve some flexibility that people, I think, have got more benefit for childcare commitments, family commitments, a whole host of other things. But you know, what we will do as well is rebuild the social fabric of the organisation around that. And I think if that means, you know, for some people there is a more flexible nature to the week to suit family commitments and so on, but still an element of social interaction and in-person working together that brings, you know, then all well and good. We all know as well that this can help us with our more fundamental challenges in reducing accommodation costs, and particularly in reducing our impact on the climate emergency, because you know the amount of unnecessary travel to and from meetings that the pandemic has kind of pulled out of the system. I think everybody's seen at least a short-term benefit from that. But I think as well as the social side of it, we've got to remember that, you know, more than half of our workforce in big urban local authorities particularly has seen very little change other than social distancing to their work patterns. You know, the street cleaners have still cleaned the streets, the bin men have still emptied the bin. We've had no impact at all on those areas in Salford, which has been quite remarkable over the past 18 months or so. And social workers particularly, and people who go to care for adults in their homes, you know, they've still had to be out and about doing that work. So, you know, we've got to remember as well, we are very, very occupationally diverse. We've got lots of people doing lots of different job roles. And, you know, the idea that it's all office-based or virtual, I think is a bit of a mistake. It's going to be very much a blended approach, but we're working very hard on a program we call My Work at Salford, which is helping us to kind of figure out a new way through that as we come out of the pandemic and out of lockdown over this autumn and beyond, really.
So I guess looking at the brave new world again, climate change, have you declared an emergency?
Yeah, no, we have in Salford, and we've declared that early as a net zero commitment for 2038. It's aligned with the GM commitment, but Salford's got a long history of working on carbon reduction, emissions reduction over probably 5-10 years previously, at least, of that, and also has a very proud history, as people will know, of working on initiatives to try to green the city in a whole range of different ways through public parks, and particularly through cycling and walking infrastructure initiatives. And we've been pursuing that, but I think in many ways the climate emergency and the emergency declaration really helps us to accelerate that work. So yes, part of it is about emissions and about moving to electric vehicles and about minimizing the carbon footprint of our buildings. But I think as much of it, as I've been saying in relation to other points, Colm, is about us doing that with the community and having that real impact on people's lived experience of how they want to work with us in tackling that climate emergency. And very much that is about public open space. It's about the quality and environmental improvement of neighbourhoods and about parks and open spaces particularly. And we are, in Salford, we are, you know, I would say without any shame whatsoever, we are part of the, you know, one of the biggest green lungs of Greater Manchester, really. We've got Peel Park and a whole host of other enormous green assets, you know, a stone's throw from the city centre here in the city of Salford. And you know, the infrastructure that connects all of that to people's neighbourhoods is fundamentally important and very, very much part of our agenda to help to tackle that, as well as all of the consequent, you know, improvements of more flexible ways of working after the pandemic, as I've said. But I think what we will see, as we have seen in Greater Manchester, really is, you know, that agenda is only going to increase in importance, in political priority, in lobby group priority, and we are without a doubt going with that tide. We are very strongly supportive of it, and if you look at the Salford Way again, as you mentioned earlier, Paul, you'll see it deliberately very, very prominent in our list of agendas for the medium term here in the city.
So we had the Queen's speech this week, and I think for anyone that's passionate about local government, there was everything from planning to housing to bins. Before we go on to planning, I know you have a real passionate about the government is talking about mandating exactly what bin collections will look like, how often your green bin's going to get collected, and how big your wheelie bin is. Great idea or bonkers?
The best response to that, Colm, is extraordinarily expensive idea. It's like any of these initiatives that I think what you have to look at really is what succeeds in minimizing waste, maximizing recyclability, and minimizing all of the climate consequences of landfill and so on at source. And what succeeds in that respect is very, very different from place to place. That's not just an arbitrary plea for localism, but you can't do recycling and waste collection in the same way in the preponderance of high-rise estates we've got in Salford city centre, in the same way as you even can in some of our neighbourhoods like Walkden and Little Holton, which are predominantly community neighbourhood full of houses instead. And equally, go much further north into Lancashire, to Cumbria and beyond, the circumstances and the practical arrangements for how you help people to minimize waste and how you then have to collect it, how you have to get it to and from the home through to disposal and so on, is very, very complicated. I think the better approach, in my view, would be to better finance those waste minimization and recyclability, and ultimately those climate emergency goals at a local level, and to leave us to it, rather than to seek standardization, which may in the end be extraordinarily expensive as a policy, without necessarily helping us to really, really bear down on tonnages going to landfill and all of those other objectives we need to achieve. So as with any of these things, place is key, locality is key, and the context in which you've got to try and operationalize and run those services matters a lot and makes a big difference to those agendas.
Sorry, my connection paused for a second there. No, we are back. That's good. So you're the Society of Local Authority Chief Exec's policy lead on planning. You watched the Queen's speech eagerly, like I'm sure all of us. There was talk of if a planning application complies with the local plan, it will almost automatically get planning permission. I guess this is part of the agenda to simplify planning. Is it too complicated?
No, it's not too complicated, is the straight answer to that. Planning is complicated, and it's complicated for good reason. It's complicated because it deliberately takes into account numerous different things in adjudicating what can and can't happen and why against local plan measures. I wouldn't say it's too complicated, and I think the challenges in the current planning reforms are that they are arguably aiming at the wrong target, I would say, Com. The pressure is being brought to bear on diminishing the role of local planning committees and increasing permitted development and a more kind of expedient approach to planning approvals, when actually, if you go back to everything I was saying about the housing crisis and affordability and so on, it is supply and bringing sites forward and the cost of doing that is a much, much bigger problem in the planning system than whether or not local planning committees are granting planning permission. We have a situation in Salford, as with many other parts of the country, where the number of planning permissions granted far outstrips the number of planning permissions that are implemented. And I think that tells its own story. It's absolutely an argument we've made and will continue to make nationally through Solace. And I think really, what's at the heart of that is that it's the classic viability dilemma for developers, really, and particularly in areas of the country where there is an oversupply of contaminated brownfield land, and or sites that have got a whole host of different delivery complexities on them. It's unlocking those sites that needs forward funding with big amounts of capital, quite honestly, that will get housing built and will help local authorities like us to intervene to rectify issues in the housing crisis. I do think, and as you said, Colm, I feel quite strongly about this. Aiming the ire at planning committees is only looking at part of the problem there, not by any means the whole problem. And very keen and will continue to make noise about that locally, regionally, nationally, as many of us in local government, for very good reason, I would say, feel very strongly about that issue.
Thank you. That's almost a fantastic bit to end on, but it looks like we're going to have some time for questions. I've got one more question for Tom, which is probably slightly unfair, but we'll ask it anyway. He won't mind. So if anybody's got any questions, if you pop them in the Q&A box, I am reliably informed they will appear on my screen, and I will do my best to read them. So do please ask away. Tom, I had this question at the end, which was, what do you want to do after Salford? Now, I realise after 100 days, that's a bit unkind, but I guess what I'm asking is, obviously you have your dream job now, but if you could take another almost dream job, what would you also want to do?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of an unfair question, because I do think, and I have said, very deliberately, Colm, from the outset, that I am here for the long term. I didn't apply for this job as a flash in the pan candidate. I am self-evidently not sitting here, a couple of years away from retirement as the last job before I kind of hang my boots up, as it were. So I do see Salford as an area of massive opportunity for many, many years to come. We've got 20 or 30 years of development pipeline ahead of us that I can see now in, the Keys, in our other towns across the whole of the city. We've got massive plans for transport, for housing and infrastructure, huge agendas around health and social care, and a lot of that is inevitably it's slow burn work. And I think being part of that and being able to leave a legacy for having been part of the city for the long term is a really important goal for me. At the moment, in all seriousness, Colm, I don't want to think about life after Salford. I think I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, as I have done earlier in my career. But I'm here for the long run, and I want to be part of the success of the place over the medium to long term, and that's very much where my head and my heart is at the moment.
So, how can we encourage more people to want to be a city chief executive?
Well, I think get involved in engaging with your local council. Talk to your local councillors about what's involved. Come and talk to people like me about one of the best things about local government, I would say, Colm, is that massive occupational diversity, the whole range of different services and things we do and things we provide. And we're talking about 400-500 different service lines when you take into account home care, waste collection, planning and surveying, all of those different things, corporate services, finance, legal, etc., etc. And a massive opportunity in that for people who want to be successful senior leaders in local government, to have the opportunity to make an impact across so many different things. I think is just, it is the best career you can have, really. And I think we should, in much the same ways we say that about, we need to campaign harder for better professional recognition for social workers, all the way through to town planners. we need to evangelize about that. You know, local government should be, and is for many of us, a career of choice. It's like a vocation, really. And I think we can and should sell it better. So, you know, anyone listening to this or tuning into the recording afterwards, come and have a conversation, because, you know, I don't think it would take me long to try and get people excited about careers in and around the sector, and I'll be delighted to help that wherever I can, quite honestly.
Fantastic. We have a couple of questions. We have seen a strong movement towards build to rent in Greater Manchester and metropolitan cities. What is your view on this emerged asset class? Build to rent.
Yeah, build to rent. Thanks, Tim, and it is a good question. I mean, I think, you know, I have no problem with build to rent, with the whole kind of emergent PRS. I think it's you know, I think it's grown exponentially in Manchester. I saw it growing as well, helped it to grow actually in West Yorkshire and elsewhere in the past in my career. I think what's important though is not to look at it in isolation and not to look at it as a panacea. And I think the challenge really with, if you like, the proper PRS is it does come with that potential, if it really lets rip, to significantly skew housing markets and to, at times, compound affordability challenges at a local level. So, you know, I think it has to be there as a product and as a product of choice, particularly for young people and people getting onto the housing ladder for the first time. But we mustn't forget those other products and the ways that we need to intervene in the housing market, I would say, to bring those other products to the fore. You know, we cannot just have a BTR or PRS, whichever acronym you choose to use, dominated market, and we cannot have that as a sole solution. I don't think anyone would suggest that we would have to the housing crisis. We have to be able to work with build to rent developers to make sure that we bring forward mixed tenure developments, and that we're really working with the grain of that to ensure that where we need to intervene to improve the supply of affordable housing and of social housing, that we're working in partnership to achieve that for all communities, really. And I think that's all part and parcel of, you know, a functioning housing market and a functioning housing ladder. You know, we feel quite strongly in Salford that we're still quite a way away from achieving that nationally, regionally, locally. So it's one of a number of solutions in the mix for that, Tim, I would say, but, you know, certainly not something I would dismiss. But, you know, like any of the products, you've got to see it in context, I think.
So we've got another housing question. How can we also deliver good quality and healthy homes and neighbourhoods alongside the pressure for building large numbers of homes?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Rosalie. It is a classic viability dilemma, really. I mean, I would say in simple terms, we look to the public sector to help to take a leadership and an intervention role in balancing those things off, really. And I mean by the public sector, I mean local government, I mean regional government, and I mean national government and national funding agencies like Homes England and so on. You know, you've spotted, Rosalie, absolutely correctly that, you know, there's a cost to doing all of that. You could call that subsidy if you wish to. You know, we've shown in Salford that we're very serious about bringing forward a development vehicle to balance some of those things off. And to being very serious about creating functioning, healthy neighbourhoods alongside all of the other products that we would want to have on offer in the market. But I think, as well as, you know, brave, bold local leadership, it requires national intervention as well. It comes back to everything I was saying about the planning reforms, really. The cost of solving those viability dilemmas that you point to is the key issue there. It's not the planning system per se, and I think that's the argument as a sector. We really have to take to the national level and try to win it, quite honestly.
And what looks to be our final question: what work issue keeps you awake at night?
What work issue?
keeps you awake at night? It's almost a Cards Against Humanity question.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, they don't. I generally sleep very well. I mean, I don't sleep for long enough. I'll be the first to admit that, but I generally sleep very well. But I think any chief exec worries about, you know, some fundamental things around the budget, around children's services, child protection particularly. But you know, I sleep well. I sleep quite calmly throughout the night. Most nights, I always have done really. And I think what's really important in leadership roles, Colm, is, you know, you learn to be calmer, or you try to learn to be calmer the more senior you get, because you end up with a much bigger, much more diverse professional team around you. And I think it's relying on your team that helps you to avoid sleepless nights rather than trying to worry about everything personally. And that's the nature for me of you know, leadership, of trying to be a team player, of trying to play to everybody's strengths. I've got really good professionals around me in Salford. I'm very privileged for a whole host of reasons to have such a great team around me. You know, people who are well known nationally, people who are well known in the region, and you know that, along with my like of sleep, is probably the thing that helps me to sleep at night rather than stay awake worrying about everything.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Well, as the sun sets over the Salford Quays behind you, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for talking about the Salford Way, bins, housing, all the things in local government we love. It's been really great to catch up.
Great. Nice to have seen you, Colm, and pleasure to speak, and look forward to doing so again in future.
Thank you.